The biggest case of familial
Yes.
spread, we've had where there's been a couple of families cohabitating in the same house, and it goes from one family member to another family member to another family member, and we've had one family out for over, about 5 weeks.
That's so rough.
Because it just kept spreading from one to the other. One would come back and then another one would stay home. So it just depends on where in the cycle they actually contracted the COVID. The ones early on were able to come back, but the ones that were later in contracting it, there was one outbreak of approximately five weeks. Because he was the last one to get
Oh,
so.
that's such a bummer. That's
Yeah,
really
so otherwise, that's where I see it the most. We don't have school spread at this point. Everybody that we have seen has had family members. They've had close contact with a family member or close contact outside of the school. We have had some of those converge
Yeah.
with the close contact of other people outside of the house, but we've not had anything within the school.
That's excellent. And so, oh no, go ahead. Oh, so Darlene and I discussed this as well, and in terms of the 14 days, it's a possibility that if we do shorten it to 10, and our data shows that maybe we are getting some conversions and some issues, we may have to recommend extending it back out again. So that would be another thing just to be aware of.
Dr. McKenna,
Yeah.
can I just clarify, that's with a negative test though during your quarantine, it's not, otherwise you refuse to test at 14, correct?
No, this is according to the CDC and DPS guidelines. They indicate 10 to 14 days, and that is without testing,
After first exposure.
after first exposure. Yep,
So
and
you
obviously,
don't have to have a negative test, okay. I thought it was only with a negative test, it could be shortened, okay, that's good clarity.
absolutely. And actually, obviously, if someone becomes symptomatic, that resets the clock, that changes the parameters, obviously.
But the CDC was saying 7 days with a negative test, but you're not recommending that?
We talked about that. Logistically, it's difficult to get prompt testing, so I think it might end up, in terms of the exposures and the amount of COVID in the community, testing still can be a little bit of a delay, a day or two at least if you're high priority, and a little bit longer if you're lower priority. So I think logistically it would end up being very similar. So you might go and get tested, and then by day 10, they're letting you know you have a negative test, and then you might be, then you're released. So we didn't want to initiate that.
Well, wouldn't I want to get tested on day 5, so I'd have it back by day 7?
The CDC guidelines is to get tested on day 7 and have a negative test. I'm pretty sure.
Well, the guidelines now is to get tested 48 hours after contact, and then if you're negative, you can come back. The problem with that is people are the most infectious at day 5. So we would be missing a large amount of potential positives and having them come back into the school if we shortened it down to day 7. So I don't really feel comfortable with that option at all.
But what if you said they can't get tested until day 5?
Well, and actually that would be right. So you have to be tested within 48 hours before the time of planned quarantine discontinuation.
Oh, it is 7.
That's what, yeah. So you've got to get to around that 6 or 7 day period and get tested anyway. So you might get tested at 5 or 6, and then you could potentially be done. But it has to be within that 48 hour, so you have to get within 48 hours of day 7.
Uh-huh.
So, and so you might get tested at day 5, you're waiting a couple of days. It's a good question. I will say CDC generally, recommends a quarantine period of 14 days. But they're saying because of expediency that, we could consider this possibility.
Is our high school, like 8th grade to high school, what percentage of the COVID cases is that compared to the younger grades? Just, so like if this sentence says, for instance, at day 10, with symptom monitoring but without diagnostic testing, the estimated residual post-quarantine transmission risk was 1.4%. That's, like you said, a bell curve, very low, but a range of 0.1 to 10.6.
Yeah.
But it's much more inconvenient for parents of elementary kids, so going back 4 days earlier would be a big benefit for them. Or I'd be more tempted to let the high school kids stay home because that's not, they don't got to be supervised. Presumably, but I don't know if there's any, I guess I lean sort of maybe go say we should do the 10 days anyways. But does high school, is it worse in the high school where they could benefit from that little bit?
Well, right now we have, of the positive cases, student positive cases, it's only the high school. We have 6 positive cases currently at the high school level, and those are all the student positives we have. None at elementary, there's none at the middle school. So, the only, and we've talked, the one reservation I have with going to the 10-day is the CDC, and I apologize for misquoting the 7-day. The CDC, from what I understand from reading, is recommending that they still get monitored through day 14. First off, that's not something that we as a district are going to be able to take care of. We just can't monitor all those kids. We've got 95 out now, and when the basketball team comes back, that's 32 kids right there that we would have to monitor from day 11 through day 14, and there's no way that we can do that and then monitor and do all the rest of the work. And history has shown that it won't happen at home. They're supposed to stay home when they're sick, but we still have parents who actually medicate their children and send them to school. And I know a lot of it's out of necessity, like you said, so maybe decreasing to 10 might help it. So, that might be a pro for that part. But, and the students come in ill. I had a student last week who came in ill, was picked up, driven to school by one of our staff members, was in school for a half hour, came down, spent 2 hours in my health room because I didn't feel comfortable having her walk out of that room, and she tested positive. And, I asked her, why did you come to school? And she goes, well, because I've missed school before, or, my mom told me I had to come. And that was potential, and luckily she did come down. Her teacher sent her down right away. She was only in class for about a half hour. We did have 3 students that had to go home because of close contact with that one. So that is the only reservation I have at this point, is because we still have people coming to school sick. We still have people sending their kids to school sick. Again, a lot out of necessity. We still have kids getting medicated, so when they come to school, they don't have a temperature. So that is, I guess, my biggest reservation. And we cannot monitor those people for those 14 days. We just can't logistically do it. We have to rely on them doing it at home. And I'm not sure that will be done. So that's my biggest reservation.
Right now in the country, we've had the most deaths from, well, this was Friday's data, but the most deaths from coronavirus. It's generally exploding all over the country. We've had, people, younger individuals, who have, gotten really sick from it, along with significant, death and mortality. I think since I've last been here, I had 15 patients pass away at Hami Home. I've been nursing home where I'm the medical director, in a matter of 2.5 weeks. So it's some, looking at data and making reasoned decisions based on science and best evidence, I think is a reasonable thing to do. And we also don't want to push too hard. To speak to the 7-day, we would be very likely to have some positive cases at that point. It might not be a lot, but that's more likely. So I would say, it's definitely reasonable to look at that number. I think 10 is reasonable based on everything I've looked at. But that we remain cautious and vigilant. We have a vaccine on the horizon. The vaccines are very good. And I'm happy if anyone either has hesitation about them or questions about them. At any point, you can give my number out. I'm happy to talk to anyone about it. Really, the vaccines will allow us to return, and I'm not sure when that point is, to normal life.
Would you say after a student gets 2 doses, they cannot wear their mask anymore?
We will continue to wear masks, I think, until, and I've thought about this, probably what will happen is that mask wearing will stop becoming necessary when we see hospitalizations really sort of stabilize and go down. Our hospitals have been very full, the past couple of months, with ups and downs. They're a little bit better now, but probably starting to pick up again now because of the holiday. So I think that will probably, ultimately, in an ideal world, if your hospital is not seeing people hospitalized for coronavirus, we can actually probably take care of a lot of people that get milder cases. We've gotten better at taking care of those individuals. Right now, the big issue is that hospital capacity gets overwhelmed with people who are sick, a lot of people who would survive potentially if they weren't inundated. But because of inundation, other people get car crashes, appendicitis. Everyone suffers then because the hospital can't take care of you effectively. So once I think, and that could potentially be in the summer, and that certainly could be potentially at other times. So I think you continue to have people wear masks even if they've had coronavirus because the flu exists. We want to keep those numbers down. We want to really get through the winter time. Good question.
Okay, so but you're saying if you had the vaccine, it's probably not relevant. We're not going to get it soon enough to, if everybody had it, and you brought a note from Aspire saying, hey, I got the vaccine, does that kid still have to wear the mask? Would that be a good incentive to get it? Or is that just not enough vaccine doses that we need to have the discussion?
It's a personal versus, it's a really good point. It's an individual versus collective sort of benefit. The vaccines provide the greatest benefit in a collective sense. Most people who get coronavirus will not get sick and die from it. But because no one's had it, now more and more people have, but because you have a whole population of people who haven't had it, if they get sick, they make the whole system crash. So the same thing with the vaccine. If everyone gets it, it won't be present and around, and we'll be able to go back to better life. But individually, like a kid getting a vaccine is really not beneficial to most kids. In an individual level. They're not going to get terribly sick from it. It's not going to affect them. They're really doing it, and we're all doing it really for one another. And because we're all tired of wearing masks, and man, it sure be great to go into a restaurant and order some, cheese curds and whatever you like. So that's really the incentive. Yeah.
Well, there is some discussion already on a national level that once the new president is inaugurated, that he's going to request a 100-day mask mandate for the country.
Well, that would
So that may take it out of
that would just be
the decision out of our hands.
Purely reasonable, but you see individuals with varying understandings, and people don't have to, it's not, people can kind of choose to speed, and they can choose to not wear masks, which is
Because the president wouldn't have any more power to enforce it than the governor, and I wouldn't say you get tons of enforcement in our area. in a non-school
This,
setting.
I would not disagree with that statement.
So Julie, we're here tonight because you're asking us to change what we're currently doing possibly, or to continue the track that we're on, right?
Correct.
So in hearing what I'm hearing from Dr. McKenna and from Darlene, who both of those guys have done a great job, I'm of the opinion, where I come from, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So why can't we just leave what we're doing? Because I hear reservation, I hear possibility, you know, that some things could come up, and then we'll have to go back to the former plan. So I'm of the opinion, I think just hearing from the two of them that they would be okay even leaving it alone the way that it is now, because we've had such low cases, and Dr. McKenna even said that we could possibly have some potential positives if we do this. I mean, I know it's an experiment. We don't know. Nobody knows tomorrow. But if what we have done from September until now has worked, and when these students, I mean, my son was a close contact, and he I don't know if you want to say suffered or benefited, but he was able to do all of his work at home with remote learning. You know, I don't know. I'm just of the opinion if we're doing everything now, we're doing it right now, what's the difference of the 14 days to the 10 days?
I think,
4 days.
Oh, and I would just echo.
4 days,
again,
yeah.
That's very reasonable, and it makes a lot of sense. I will say too, it does, sometimes from a communication standpoint, that might be another thing for you all to think about, is that the county, I think, is going down to a 10-day. And so, in terms of communicating and confusion, and, you know, undermining sort of public trust, you know, having differing days may be something that plays into it as well. But I do really appreciate your words of support. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
And he's right, I talked with public health, and they did go with the 10. And when I asked them if we did decide to stay on the 14, my concern, one of my concerns, we've got a really good collaboration with them. We work so well
Absolutely.
with public health. And I just didn't want it to be a confusing factor on their end for their contact tracers. But what they had said is if we do choose to go stay on the 14, when it is a school contact, I will still be doing all the contact tracing, and they will let the parent know that the school nurse will be calling them to give the quarantine instructions. They will do the 10-day with the parent, but if it's a school-age child, then I will be giving the information.
And that's what you're currently doing now, correct?
It is.
You do that, yeah.
Yeah, and right now, when we were both on the same page at 14, if I did any close contact, because a parent called and said, I just got it off of the spiders, I would get the information, and then I would call public health, give them the information, which helps lessen their load, and they would do the same for me. But the only thing that would be different would be a few more phone calls for me, because they would just call and say, so-and-so is a close contact to a positive case in the household, please call them to give them guidance.
Right.
And they said that they are very willing to do that. So I just, it's not going to be an overload for them, which was one of my big concerns.
Right.
So, open to whichever.
You know, another reason why I'm thinking and saying that let's kind of leave this and the way that it is all of our administration is familiar with this plan, how it works. And, you know, a lot of times we have a tendency to change things quite often in the district, and teachers have to learn things all over again. I've heard it. I've heard Mary say this before, but, you know, giving us some stories of her past history with teaching. This will keep the teachers, the administration, everybody still going in the same direction.
Danny, though,
I don't know.
You know, and I can just speak personally, I mean, I think you have to be aware that 4 additional days is placing a burden on the operation of the school if somebody is symptom-free and healthy to come back to work.
yeah.
But the possibilities, as Dr. McKenna has already said, goes up of getting positive cases here if we lower the numbers.
But,
Is that what I heard, Dr.
but the
McKenna?
average is a
Danny,
1% risk.
Yeah, Danny, that is true. I will say probably the greatest risk is in that, 3 to 7 or 8 day grade. I would definitely not support as readily a 7-day quarantine, even with kind of testing, necessarily. But 10-day, certainly from a risk mitigation standpoint, it's a shorter time frame, so you're taking on a bit of risk, but I do think it is ultimately potentially acceptable. Where, as others have noted, we've taken on some risk already by being open. And so, in that light, and with our information, I think it's okay, but I wouldn't go less than that at this time, for
Right,
sure.
right.
Absolutely. But
So
10
I'll give
days,
you
I
an
think,
example. This is Heidi. So I'm in quarantine right now. I did not test, I was a close contact. I didn't test until day 8. I had no symptoms. Tested on day 8, it was negative. And so I could have come back based on new guidelines on the 10th, or on this last Monday, but I kept my 14. And I'm okay doing it because part of me is, it's not broke, don't fix it. But with it, like if we could put even simple protocols in place where, if that's the case where you get a test on that day, and then on day 10, you could potentially come back. I mean, I can work from home, I'm good with it, but I can go out in the community on day 10, but I can't go to work with that negative test. So that's why we haven't as well.
I think I had other people contact me and ask me what we're gonna do here. From the sports standpoint, because, as you said, it sounds like all our sports teams are quarantined. But, so if they're out for 2 weeks, they're not playing that many games this year anyhow.
Right.
And so they'd rather be out for 1 week, which I think we're all agreed we're not doing that, but 10 days gets them maybe 1 more game. I think it's, what JD was saying, well, if parents don't have to deal with their little kids being home for 4 or fewer days, that makes life a little easier for them. So I'm of the opinion, let's go ahead and try it, and as Patrick said, if it looks like it's not working out, we're gonna change, and I know people are gonna be, oh, you're changing all the time, but things are changing all the time.
And at the beginning of this, we said that we were going to learn new things and that we were going to adapt to it too. And I think this is a circumstance where we have new evidence that it's safe to consider another option. And I think we have our medical experts and advisors over here telling us that this is a safe option. We have the CDC telling us that this is a safe option. I think.
Well, and Jim, we also gave the administration the latitude to navigate the changing waters on the daily as well, too.
Yeah, and they're just back asking for a consensus from us. We're not gonna vote on this, but they'd like a consensus.
Right.
And I was pleased Dr. McKenna could make it here this evening, and personally and professionally uncomfortable with the 10 days. I do worry if we would differ from public health and the CDC new guidelines, just because Darlene won't tell you, but she already takes really inappropriate and just ridiculously negative, profane communications when she makes the quarantine calls. And that's, based on the former guidelines. Now, if we don't shave 4 days off with the recommendation of CDC, I don't like any employee to have to go through that, but it does seem that we have the option to stay in step with public health, and so that would be my recommendation at this time.
We could stay in step with public health, cut it back to 10 days, but I think we should also let them know that if we start seeing a spike, we might have to go back, and we have to make that clear.
Correct?
If we need to, we'll go back to the 14 days.
And Danny, I don't want you to worry about starting and stopping with staff, because The only thing that would change is that number of days, and Darlene is the one who communicates that, so it
Okay.
actually would be seamless, in my opinion.
And I know,
So are we,
Just say, Mary?
I was just gonna say, I know some high school age kids that have been quarantined twice now. And it was like half of October and then ended up to be 3 weeks in November because of the Thanksgiving vacation. And I asked them, I said, aren't you excited to go back to school? Well, the 2 elementary kids are, because they were very excited because their friends just missed them. But the 2 high school, they just thought that they should just stay home. And of course, that's not an option at their house. They're going back and it's like they got into their at-home routine, but then they weren't getting the social interaction. But I can see where they felt like, might as well just stay home. And, if it could have cut time, of course, that Thanksgiving week ran into that time, but I don't know, I like the idea of going to the 10 days and then waiting to see what happens. We can always.
Well, we can give you an update 2 weeks.
just one more thing I'm gonna say is I visited East this morning with Julie, and Mary and I visited the high school a while back, and I'm pretty impressed. From high school down to kindergarten, kids are wearing masks, and it's way better than when I go to some place to buy something,
Yeah.
and mask wearing's not so great there. And none of these kids looked at me and looked like I was weird because I was wearing a mask, which is what you get downtown. So I think a lot of that spread, I think that leads to a lot of control of spread in the schools, and so, yeah, I'm comfortable with 10 days. I'd be comfortable with less, but I don't think that's the way to go.
Right.
And Andy, I just want to add to that. The students, the schools have been the role models for, for older individuals, for people who can't be bothered with masks. It's really a remarkable inversion. And it's really impressive. In some ways, it's disheartening to see older individuals lacking the creativity and flexibility that students demonstrate, and just the flexibility to adjust to this and to adapt to adverse circumstances. It definitely
I just want to kind of give the school district attaboy as well, because I talked to a doctor from Marshfield yesterday, concerned about a child coming back into school because of a health condition. He was adamant that the child shouldn't come back to school because schools are not where kids should be with the increasing rise in COVID. That any child, if they were home before, they should come back. And I just said, our school is very safe, we wear masks. The highest percentage of positivity that we've had so far is 0.78% out of all of the in-person instruction. And he just asked where we were, because he said that's not been his experience at other schools. The other positivity rates at other schools have been tremendous. And he was very surprised to hear that our positivity rate, and that includes both staff and students, he was completely in awe of the way this school district has handled opening the schools and doing what we need to do to keep the schools safe. He said that's not what he finds anywhere else in the state. So everything that you all have supported us in, and everything that the teachers and everybody, the frontline workers in the schools, they should be commended for the job, and you should be commended for the job and the support that you've given us to make sure that we can keep our schools open and that everybody stays safe. So he was really impressed with Amy. So.
Okay,
Out of curiosity, how much extra money did we spend on our heat bill with the increased filtration or air circulation?
Not much yet.
Not enough.
We're monitoring it and we're adjusting where we can, but now's a good time if we start to see significant rising. But we'll keep an eye on it and we'll keep doing the best we can with it to balance it. We'll probably dial it back a little bit at places. You know, when it gets really cold, we're just gonna have to prevent freezing. So Rick is doing a great job with the whole system. So.
okay, so have we kind of reached consensus on this, that 10 days sounds okay? We're good, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on COVID?
That concludes COVID update.
Okay. Then we're gonna go on to new business and item 8, board member meetings or legislative report. Anybody have anything they wanna report on? The only thing I wanna report on, and it's kind of a meeting, but I attended East with Julie this morning, and every week, administration from Central goes to different schools, right? And Julie
Correct.
has said that if any board members want to go along, that they're welcome to do that. And so if you want to go along and find out how the facilities are working, maybe you want to go along with Jake to some building, but anyway, it's a great opportunity to visit a school. But visits aren't limited to that,
Right.
if you want to visit some other way. Anything else? Okay, with that, we'll go on to item B, review of the 2021-22 budget calendar. Yeah.
So I'm a month late in getting this to you, but the real purpose of it not only is to lay out the sequence of planning for next year's budget, but I believe when we had the last board survey, the board made comments as to we don't spend a lot of time looking at necessarily programs. And what I'd like, an opportunity, if you just want to send Julie or I an email, if you have an area or a program within the budget that you'd like to know more about financially, I try to plug that into the calendar, and we could, look at 8 to 10 different areas of the budget through the course of the year. So if you have areas you're interested in, just shoot me an email, preferably before December, so we can kind of officially set this as the planning document for me. I'd appreciate that.
So you're saying if somebody wants to see Jake's proposed 5-year maintenance plan, is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
I'm thinking if you want to delve more into costs of a particular project, whether that might be title or it could be, when we talked a little bit, how does food service operate? Why does food service necessarily have a high fund balance? And we can go into detail on the funding mechanism, how free and reduced affects that program, those kinds of things. Look at the title budget from a financial standpoint. Who's supported by that budget? How do we run it? What's just a little more background, a little more what's eligible costs, and we can get into that kind of detail if you want to. The unfortunate thing is that a presentation on any one of those programs is probably going to take a half an hour. And that's really been the shortcoming for us not getting into that information. But if that's something you're interested in, maybe we only take 3 or 4 a year, and we spend the time doing that. I'd be happy to try to plug that in.
Mm-hmm. I guess I could ask members of the board, are you interested in having those kind of presentations? Or would you like to see things more from an academic standpoint, or
I guess I'd rather see half-hour presentations on academic stuff than on the budget.
I was going to say, could we do a mix of, 10 minutes suggested 4 months? Yeah.
Pick the interesting ones for us, Tim.
Well, I think Tim made a good point there, that it's up to us to tell him what we're interested in. And that would be the same for academic things, So I guess we'll just leave it as the board pick something out here and send it to Julie, I guess, huh?
Well, Andy, we could have a discussion next week, Tuesday at Colt, and, you know, maybe give you some, a little bit of feedback of here are 3 or 4 program areas, our biggest program areas, and give you more detail both from an academic standpoint, what the goal of those programs are. I mean, you're gonna hear us talking about Title I, Title II, Title IV, Title V, idea, flow through, you know, there's just a whole lot of verbiage that we use.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, we talked today a little bit about how, whether those programs are inclusive, proactive, reactive, and how the federal standards drive them, and what are they really trying to achieve, and are they doing that? So we could have that discussion and bring it back to you in December, and maybe plug some dates or something in there too. If I don't hear from the board, maybe that's what I'll do.
Okay, that would be good. Yeah, maybe that's good if you do hear from the board. Okay. Anything else on this?
The only other thing is, someone from CLA will be presenting at the January Committee of the Whole, and they'll have the auditor's report. And then we're hoping, I'm working on our financial model right now, and hopefully we'll have a better handle on where we're going with next year's budget. But that's really, we're in the preliminary stages right now, looking at it.
Okay. We'll go on to item C, Life Tools Group presentation.
So Heidi's on the phone and Kelly Durline is also here. And you have 2 attachments to look at. And with that, Heidi, we'll start with you.
This is weird doing it by phone, so I'll try to be brief, and then I'll let Kelly share a little bit of the messages of what this looks like. In August, Julie actually forwarded an opportunity from Marshfield Clinic regarding a Life Tools program that they are piloting. They piloted it last year, and what you have in front of you was the original presentation, and they had about, I'm not sure, schools opt-in, and basically so what it is doing is it is utilizing sources of it in actual format, especially in where the mental health resources are limited, which we fall into, especially this year. Everybody is strapped with mental health care. Our on-site therapy is limited. We do still have some, but those types of things have been limited. And so I brought the pupil services team together, which included the social worker, psychologist, the school counselor, to talk about this program that was presented to me from Marshfield Clinic. And I totally respect what we wanted to do it. It's an after-school program. It is led by our counselors, and they have facilitators and co-facilitators. And what it is an extension for some of our highest needs kids to learn life tools. And as you see in this document, self-awareness, self-management, relationship skills, those are the types of things. It is not to replace therapy, and they're clear about that. It's a emotional group, and so our counselors decided that they did want to run it in a limited fashion. So we're going to run an East-West group, although that may change a little bit. We're working through a North group and a 4-5 group. And so Kelly Durline, Betsy and Lauren, that's our school social worker, will be leading those groups, and then they have co-facilitators that will be leading them. It's 8 weeks. They do it once a week, and as you see in here, it's very scripted. It was designed as a research project by Marshfield Clinic with Marshfield Schools and by a clinical psychologist down there 2 years ago. And it's a curriculum that they've been doing. And what's really cool about it is it comes through our support system. We will design it and embed it in there that you were shared with last time. And we're going to run an 8-week period starting second semester. And see if we can have some impact on some of our highest need kids. It's about 8 kids per group. And then we'll see how it goes. What's really cool also is that they provide the funds, and it's $5,000, which most of it goes to the facilitators and co-facilitators to make it worth their expertise and their time. And that's the other piece of this, is that it was staff, counseling staff from our schools that are doing it. So it's a connection through our day and for those kids as well. And so we're excited to be partnering. And the last piece is that they're also partnering with Dr. Hartwig in the BEST, which we still are working on and screen our kids with and using that data. So it seemed like a natural fit. And we're really excited to talk to this, how it goes. Kelly's going to now a little bit about actually the training that they're going through. Then if you have questions, please feel free. So Kelly?
So I'm really excited about this program. When I looked at the manual, it's everything that goes along with those social emotional learning skills that we've really been working with our students on the last few years. So it very much kind of mirrors what they're learning in the classroom as far as the second step lessons, and just gives us some more hands-on activities that we can do with students. So the groups, like Heidi said, would be 8 weeks in length. They would be about an hour at a time, and we have the opportunity for virtual. Some schools did it virtual last spring, so we're able to tap into the work that they've done and be able to offer it virtually. So we still, kind of the nuts and bolts are still being worked out. We had our first training session this last Friday, and then next Friday we'll have our final training session as far as training the facilitators and co-facilitators. The other piece that I really like about this is I've done some parent training and the mindfulness strengthening families training with students and with families. And this gives our co-facilitator the ability that if they need to step out and have a conversation with a student who maybe is struggling with a behavioral issue, or maybe one of the topics we're talking about is getting a little too close to home for them, and so we need to kind of have a little separation. Having that co-facilitator there will allow us to do that. Where our mindfulness strengthening families, we co-facilitated, but we presented the information together, so we really didn't have that opportunity to maybe talk with the student and do some modeling and some repair of the behavioral expectations to bring them back. So I'm excited. At the middle school, I'll be working with Amy Reichel, and we also have Miss Machi, I think, from one of our elementary schools, and then our other school counselor, Jessica, will be working with Lauren as well. So having those co-facilitators. I just want to give you one example that I think we could all use at this point in time anyway. So I'm going to just show or talk you through one activity that we would do with our students as part of this program. And it is really just to think of 3 good things that you've experienced today during your day. So just to take a moment to think about those 3 good things and to kind of keep them in your mind. Now obviously we would go further with our students during that, but to think about right now there's so many negative things going on in our lives and in our society, and we turn the news on and that's pretty much all you hear is the negative. And so this really helps focus on the positive and help students to see that they can give themselves positive messages throughout the day when they start to get stuck in some of the things that they're experiencing. So we're very excited for it. We still obviously have the nuts and bolts to work out though. Any questions?
No, sounds good.
Is this an evidence-based program yet, or is it still in the research?
We're still in the research
Okay.
stage, so they started in 2018 and then 2019 with the groups. So there is some research, but obviously we're part of the pilot as well.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Kelly
And,
and Heidi.
let's see, yes, thank you.
I'm going to hang up now and watch. Okay.
Okay.
Oh. I waved. Good.
Okay, we will go on to this report of first semester graduates.
It's quite a list.
Yes, you will see in front of you a list of those students who declared their intention to graduate at semester, including a junior. That would be at the end of the year, of course, but early graduates.
My guess is the third member of that family in particular that has done this.
It's graduated early.
What about the one student who didn't turn in a form?
I will have to check, Mr. Boldig, that's a good question.
And I see we've got one that's graduating in 0202. You gotta remember, I proofread.
We'll bring this back to you,
For your proofreading.
Thank you.
for your, in 2 weeks for your approval, so we'll have updated information at that time.
Works for me.
You know, in the past, we've gotten this and it said what these kids have intended to do. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that would be interesting to see what their plan is.
Yeah. Well, my only point on that is if they're going to work on the family farm or something, that's fine. But if they're going to go to college, it seems like we should encourage them to stay in high school and take college credits here.
It's like gap semester, Andy.
It's what?
It's a gap semester.
It's a gap semester, okay. That's good too, that's good too. So, okay, if it's a gap semester, that's good. I'll let that go. I forgot about gap semesters. Okay, we'll go on to item E, City of Antigo Ball Field Agreement.
Andy, this is the same agreement that we've been signing, so we, the girls softball team uses the city facilities. And so it's an agreement that we have with the city for them to prepare the diamonds for play. Last year during COVID, we had the same agreement, and since we didn't have any softball, we didn't pay any fees, so they've been really good to work with.
Okay.
Did we have the red line in there last year?
What happened is, I think we stopped using Saratoga, and I'm not all that familiar with all the diamonds that the girls' team uses, but that was in there from a previous contract, and we took it out last year, and then this is just the same document showing that.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll bring this forward for approval at the board meeting. Okay, and then item F is discussion of safety grant requirements.
Yeah, so if you guys remember last year in December, I brought you the crisis plan and safety drills, specifically in relation to Alice. Part of the DOJ grant that we received, I think it was almost $300,000 of ability to improve our safety protocols and things of that nature. This is just a requirement tied to that you review the crisis plan, approve it, and same with the safety drills. So I just want to give you a heads up that those are going to be coming at the board meeting for you to approve. And also with all the uncertainties and different protocols that we've had with COVID, our Alice is really kind of, I don't want to say taking a backseat, but certainly we haven't been able to perform what we wanted to the way we do. If you remember in the past, we had, it was extravagant as the entire high school campus be evacuated to the furthest reaches of the campus in a drill for a full evacuation. We certainly don't want to do mass gatherings like that with COVID, so we can't do things like that, and we can't do things like we normally did by grade or by school, a full assembly, we brought law enforcement in, and we had an hour-long conversation with a slideshow presentation about Alice, and talked to them as a whole group, you know, so we can't do that this year either, so. Fortunately, last year and, well, the year before, we started at the high school, and then last year, we continued at the high school and brought it to the middle school for, we do when-then scenarios, or just open discussion on a certain topic of Alice. And we piggyback those every month to the fire drills. Now, the DOJ only requires us to do one a year and document it, where we're doing 9. So, working with Ed Dorff, which is the executive director of WISCA, he is very happy with the path that we've been on a couple years, and he's kind of used this as a guide for other districts to follow. So I reviewed this with him and told him that we're obviously not doing what we'd really like to do this year for good reason, and he felt comfortable with what we're doing. But he said, you know, it is a law that we are required to do this, so they can't just ignore it. But what they can do is give us latitude in the schedule in which we get everything completed. So he said, in these drills, you know, in the comment box explaining what's going on, add a comment that due to COVID restrictions and scheduling requirements, you know, some of this stuff may not be done, but it's in progress, and this is where we are at the time. You know, and he discussed, you know, there's some districts that aren't even in session, so they're not doing any of it right now. So they're putting that off until much later than we are. So I feel like we're in a good spot. Initially, I didn't subscribe to the e-learning that we do every year with the staff, because it's like $3,000 a year to do that. And if we were gonna be open for 3 or 4 weeks and then shut down, I really didn't wanna spend that money if we weren't gonna be in the buildings. So I intentionally delayed it a little bit for that reason, and with all the other COVID stuff that the staff has had to try and catch up with the online stuff. Again, I don't wanna say that we made the conscious decision just to ignore it, but, you know, there's certainly other things at the forefront that I felt comfortable, the work we've done in the last 3-4 years on Alice, that we could sustain where we're at and continue our practice of this without forcing it into the front end. So, I guess, to be real specific on what that's gonna look like, when you look at the high school, 8 through 12, those kids have had a lot of exposure to this. They could probably talk to you for an hour about Alice. They have been doing these drills attached with the fire alarm drills already. So they're good, they haven't been missing a week. When you get to middle school, for 5, 6, and 7, again, they had quite a bit of exposure. Last year, we did a full assembly with all of them, and we did the wet drills, the scenario trainings with them monthly. So I'm not concerned about 5 through 12 at all. When you look at 4th grade though, they have not had exposure to the full assembly slideshow really explanation. What they experienced was a light conversation with their teacher in their classroom, reading the I'm Not Scared, I'm Prepared book from Alice. So that shift from reading that book to really talking about an active shooter, that's a step that we don't want to rush, and we want to make sure we do that right. So 4th grade is going to be a little bit lethargic to get through. But then when you look at 1 through 3, they had the book last year. This should be a repeat for them. I'm not too concerned about that. And then we have kindergarten, which would be new. Okay. So one thing that we've always done in the past is really over-communicated with the parents about what we're doing, when we're doing it, why we're doing it, and invited them. Last year, we did not notify the high school parents because of all the past work we've done with them, and we got 0 complaints. Everything was great. Everything worked really well. Talking with Amy today about the communication for middle school, we felt that, 5 through 7 is kind of in that same boat. They've had a lot of exposure, parents are very comfortable with it, we're not too concerned about that. 4th grade, we're gonna wanna communicate definitely, and same thing with our youngest kids, K through 3, we're always gonna communicate that with them, because who knows what kids are gonna come home and ask, and those parents should be prepared for fielding some of those questions and know what's going on. So we're gonna communicate with K through 4, and we'll work through it. Now, another piece of this is the staff. We have new staff every year from other districts or fresh out of college that may or may not have had exposure to ALS. We like to do a training with them. Again, we're not gonna bring them all together. We're gonna do some sort of Zoom thing. But in order to get around that in the meantime, we're going to pair up, whether it's an IA that's done this, a principal, myself, whatever, we're gonna put an experienced ALS instructor with those staff that aren't comfortable doing this to make sure that they can get through this first one and how we can really fully train them how we want to. So, some of those things, and that's a lot of detail, so, some of those things are what we're gonna include in the explanations at the bottom. Most of it we'll have done, but something we won't. And as I said, I covered that with that door. And if you remember me talking about that, and for you, those of you that weren't on the board, going back to even the prom incident, he really came up and helped us get through the hot wash for that and move on from that. And he's just a wealth of knowledge, great guy, and he's very happy to see how we've handled the entire ALS rollout for the last 5 years. So I always make sure I check with him and make sure that we're doing the right thing on the straight and narrow. He's been very happy with where we're at. So what you can expect to see is the crisis plan and then 5 documents reviewing the drills that are happening at each building, and Andy will have to sign them at the December board meetings. Any questions?
That sounds good. Okay, thank you. And we're confirming the next meeting to be Tuesday, January 12th. Okay. And with that, yes. Second. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.